All right. Well, nice to see you all again. So we are in module four. We just finished talking about the fallacy of composition, right? FC, and also the fallacy of division, FD. And we mentioned on that particular module, module three, what that really means. But now we're not going to really be talking about fallacy. We're going to talk about something that seems like a fallacy. In particular, we're going to talk about the vagueness problem. And this is a big issue, which can lead many times to fallacies. So I'm going to abbreviate this particular problem as VP, and code, which stands for vagueness, the vagueness problem. So today as I mentioned, today we're talking about vagueness, and one important thing to know right away, according to the reading, vagueness is not technically an informal logical fallacy. Instead, it's one of the most common sources of unclear or misleading communication. So even though it's not a fallacy in the strict sense, vagueness still causes serious problems and issues in reasoning or argumentation and everyday conversation, which is why we study it alongside fallacies. I mean, that's why writing is so important, because when you write a paper, you are technically learning how not to be vague. So when you're writing the reflection assignments, for instance, and I'm asking you, can you elaborate what you're trying to say? For instance, when I say, how does the reading made you reflect? Oh, the reading made me reflect because it made me learn how to argue and made me think logically. Okay, that's vague. Do you need to say more? Say, kind of elaborate on what you're trying to say in your reflections. And this goes on in any discussion and dialogues. So it's important that you train yourself on how not to be vague, because it leads to miscommunication. It helps with dating, it helps with marriage, it helps with you talking with friends and family. Being communicative in a good way is always a good thing. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So, what is the definition of vagueness? And this is a common word that many of us know, but let's try to like dissect of what this means. So, a word or phrase is vague when it is imprecise or lacks specific clarifying details. So, in essence, vagueness happens when a statement could reasonably mean several different things, and the speaker does not specify which meaning they intend. So let me give you an example. So in my ethics course, or intro to philosophy course, I ask students the same thing in your reflections. How does the reading make you reflect? And in the ethics course, many of the readings are going to talk about ethics and wisdom. So many times students will say, "Oh, the reading made me think about wisdom and how that's important." That could mean anything. What does Ubuntu say about wisdom? What does the Native American ethics say about wisdom? What does Aristotle and Proverbs say about ethics? Kind of be specific. The more specific, the more you avoid being vague. I mean, ChatGPT is very known to being vague, and using and contributing to this problem. So, so once again, vagueness happens when a statement could reasonably mean several different things. When your sentence or what you wrote means could mean several different things, that's when it becomes vague. It becomes a vague problem. So, so vagueness occurs when language fails to pin down what exactly is being claimed. So let's dive in straight into the examples. Some of the readings mentioned. So the first one is Mary Smith is special. Well, okay, the reading gives this example. It's obvious that Mary Smith is special, but the problem here, as we can tell, is what do we mean by the word special? So why is this vague? Well, special can mean emotionally important, intellectually gifted, entitled to privileges, or even mentally disabled. So because the speaker never clarifies what kind of special Mary is, we don't actually know what claim is being made. So therefore, this use of the word special becomes very, very, very vague. So if we take from this example, vagueness blocks understanding. You can't evaluate or challenge a claim if you don't know what it means. So the next example that I have here is policy is unfair. Um, Suppose someone says the policy is unfair. At first glance, that sounds like a strong criticism, but it's actually vague. So why is this vague? Well, it's unfair to whom? It's unfair in what way? Economically unfair, racially unfair, procedurally unfair. Well, obviously this matters. Without clarification, the statement cannot support an argument. Vagueness here looks persuasive, but doesn't actually give reason. Another way, let's say you guys say the professor is really tough. Like I'm tough. I'm a tough professor. You know, okay, I'm tough in what way? Tough grader, tough personality, tough course material, emotionally demanding. Maybe I'm tough, strong and tough in that way. I tough in a sense of like I don't have fear. What does it mean when the professor is really tough? Don't assume, right? Very big. Don't just assume that someone knows what you're trying to say. If you remember the very first module, we talked about the characteristics of a critical thinker. Don't assume. Make sure you are clear. And also, I think it's a sixth point of a critical thinker. Try to be clear in your communication. Try to elaborate and explain what you mean. So once again, this the professor is tough is vague because it lacks specificity. Two students can mean completely different things while using the same word. How about let's use political vagueness as an example. Let's say I support common sense reforms. I support common sense reform, which has been used a lot lately politically. Why is this vague? Why is a statement I support common sense reforms? Well, what reforms? Common sense according to whom? Have you ever heard of the phrase "common sense ain't so common"? Well, common sense to whom? If you go to a different country, common sense is different in every other country. There are countries that, for instance, in our, especially in New York City, we like personal space. If you go to another country, especially in Asia, sometimes they're very close to each other, and personal space doesn't really quite exist. So in their worldview, all right, common sense may look different. Like whereas in New York City or in different states in the U.S., common sense would be don't get close to me because you get close to me, I'm gonna feel very uncomfortable. So common sense according to whom? And then what policy does this commit to the speaker to? It's not clear. So politicians often use vagueness strategically. It allows them to appeal to many people without committing to anything concrete. So in essence, it makes them avoid answering the question when someone is being vague. It's clever in some ways, but it's remember what fallacy means. Fallacy means being deceitful, unclear, being tricky. So when someone's trying to be vague, although it looks like it's very clever, it's actually being very deceitful. So you want to be honest, right? You want to be humble. You want to make sure you're honest with people. So another vagueness would be like question dodging. It's like let's say when you say where were you and oh I was out. In legal or serious context, vagueness can be used to avoid accountability. So when you say I was out, when the defendant says I was out, the response technically answers the questions, but not in a meaningful way. Out where? With whom? For how long? There's this funny Instagram video that I've seen on social media where this cop stops or police officer stops a particular individual, and this individual is in a car, and he was smoking something. He looked very drugged up. You can see it in his eyes, and the cop asks him the question, where are you headed to, and where do you live? And the person responds, "Oh, I live next to my mom." And and then the the cop asks, "Up, where does your mom live?" "My mom lives next to my neighbor." And then the cop responds again, "Okay, where does your neighbor live?" And then he would the person would say, "Oh, he lives in a community," and then and then the cop would say, "Well, where's the community? Oh, the community is in a location 2 miles from here." And I'm not saying exactly how the video is being said, it's how it's stated, but it's something along that line. And eventually, the person keeps being vague in his answers, um, and it becomes very funny. But overall, it's saying, okay, so where does these people live? I'm like, oh, you don't mind what you don't know what I'm gonna say, but they live on Earth or something like that. Overall, what this example is practically showing of this particular vagueness of question dodging is like you're answering the question, but you're not answering the question at the same time, and that's the problem of being vague. Another one would be "it is what it is." This phrase gives the appearance of an answer while actually communicating nothing. It's vague because it avoids describing any specific experience, evaluation, or outcome. So that statement, "it is what it is," doesn't really say doesn't really say much. So next slide is why vagueness is a problem for reasoning. I mean, this is important for you guys to really understand what I'm saying here. Vagueness is dangerous because arguments depend on clarity. If key terms are vague, we can't evaluate truth or falsity. We can't assess evidence or hold speakers accountable, right? In philosophy, right, and in academic writing more generally, clarity is not optional, right? Precision is what separates argument from rhetoric. You got to make sure that you train yourself on not being vague, because you by being clear in your communication, being clear in what you're trying to say, you're able to train yourself on how to evaluate truth from falsity, and assess evidence, or hold particular individuals accountable. Because if someone is trying to be vague when you're conversating with them, and you know this particular problem, you can say, can you clarify what you mean? Can you elaborate on what you're trying to say? Can you give me some examples of what you mean? Right? You hold the speaker or the individual accountable, and you yourself should be doing the same thing. You should provide examples. You should simplify what you mean. You should further elaborate what you're trying to say, because this all helps in communicating and seeking after truth. So, you as students of this logic course, is always important that you consider these particular questions. What exactly do I mean by this term? So, like, to avoid vagueness in your writing or in your communication, you should ask yourself this question: what exactly do I mean by this term that I'm using? Can someone that is reading my work, can they reasonably misunderstand me or misunderstand what I'm trying to say? Can I give examples or criteria or definitions that would help explain what I'm trying to say? And these things will help you avoid being vague. And I hope you see the importance of this, because it helps in your communication with people, with your friends, and with whoever you married with, right? They always say in marriage or in relationships, communication is the most important thing that people lack. And this is why, communication is good when you are being clear with what you're trying to say. So make sure that you train yourself and not being vague in your communication. All right. Well, now that we end this discussion, if you have any questions about it, feel free to send me an email. But I hope this all makes sense. And if not, feel free to send me an email. All right. Well, take care and have a good one.